welcome to Community Over Code. I'm Brian Zmers, and today with me is Lisa Cao. Today we're going to talk about some of the challenges in dealing with data architecture. So Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. And
Yeah, introduce yourself to our viewers here.
Sure. So my name's Lisa. I am a product manager at a company called Data, and essentially we help maintain an open source data catalog called Apache Gravitino. We're in the incubating stage right now, so there's a lot of fun stuff going on. But yeah, I love open source. I started out in the R community, and I started out working with LFAI and data, and now OPIA. So lots of fun stuff happening right now. Yeah.
Excellent. For folks who are not aware of the incubator, you want to talk just for a hot second about the differences between an incubator project and a top-level project?
Yeah, so a top-level project is one that's gone through the incubation project and has graduated. A project that's still undergoing incubation will have mentors on hand to kind of help guide the project in terms of getting it to the status and the standard that we expect from Apache.
Awesome. So the meat of this conversation here is about how to deal with data and infrastructure and everything related, and the architecture related to that. So, what are you doing, or what is the project you're working on doing to help users?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of open standards that have come out of Apache projects, and I think that's really exciting. Like Iceberg is the most recent one, but we have Hadoop, and so many of these technologies have driven data architecture. And why is it that we're all racing towards open source all the time, right? It's mostly because we're always looking for a new open standard, but mostly interoperability. And one of the hardest things right now for a lot of companies is figuring out how to get data from point A into point B easily and in a standard format. And the way that data catalogs, which is kind of what we do, helps mitigate that is through metadata. So you can have your data sources and then build a catalog on top of that that's powered by metadata, and then you can have your query engines directly interact with it instead of having to do all this messy, you'll still have to do ETL, but you can have a fabric layer that actually helps works with some of that, yeah.
Great, yeah. So you have some data streams, and I assume the metadata describes the layouts of the stream, what's in there?
Yeah, you can have schema information, you can have some physical information, maybe where it's stored. What we really concentrate on is that access permission. So who's able to access that data? How fresh is it? Is it the data that is actually relevant to what you want to do? Who owns it? And I think all of that metadata can be really useful in describing the data itself.
Great. So access is probably has its own challenges all by itself.
Yeah.
So how much of a data source can you limit with certain access levels? Is it portions of a data stream or a data source, or is it all or nothing?
So it can be all or nothing, but really you can have really granular parts. So you can have column level, you can have row level, you can mask certain fields. And essentially it all kind of comes down to how you're managing that data layer and the individual limitations of the source itself. So we do a push-down model. So let's say that we have a universal permission model. The access permission that we're able to push down really is limited to what that underlying source is. So let's say if you're pulling data from BigQuery, you're using IAM. If you're using Hadoop, you might have another sort of system. Same with, say, a MySQL database. And so it depends on how that all translates downwards. And so you're only really able to enforce as much as the base data source has.
Very cool. So I guess, take a step back. So before there was extra metadata attached to these sources, what was the biggest challenge?
I think it was really getting the consistency across all the systems, especially because if you're doing a federated model, so let's say you want to query the metadata layer and you want that federation to occur so that you're not moving data from the source system out of it, like that can be really tricky, right? Especially because you need to figure out where that join's actually going to happen, how you're going to do this in the most computationally efficient way, and figuring out the actual path of that execution. And then you have multiple people accessing the data at the same time through this catalog layer. How are you going to keep that consistency? How are you going to force and sync all of that up, especially at a really large scale? That can be really challenging.
Awesome. So now that you have the data, or metadata rather, metadata for your data?
The metadata for your data.
Okay.
The metadata data.
The metadata data. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. So that can really reduce a lot of friction, I assume, for getting people to consume new sources of data or use them,
Yeah.
and how they go about their lives, right? So what is currently, even with all this metadata, what do you think the biggest challenge is currently?
I think data quality is a huge challenge. People have, after data lakes kind of became really popular and we started managing all this like large amounts of structured data and unstructured data, like documents for, our chatbots and everything like that. We had this thing called a data swamp that occurred where it was just like everything was just being dumped in. We didn't know what was good quality, what was bad quality. Everybody who was consuming that data had no idea what was going on. And so you might have high quality versions of that data somewhere that somebody processed, but you wouldn't know where, and they certainly wouldn't communicate it to the rest of the company. And so I think that is really the biggest challenge, is figuring out the data quality aspects and then tagging that data set so that you know that it's high quality and that it's fresh. Yeah.
That rings some bells for me. So I know every time I've joined a company and they have a wiki that's more than, I don't know, 3 years old,
Yeah.
I feel like the quality of that data has gone down over time. Because for the same reasons, I assume, right? So is that a true parallel? Between the two?
1000%.
Yeah?
I have seen companies use like a Word document to implement like a data dictionary, and this is like literally one column is just somebody manually updating like use this data and it's stored here, and it's like, oh my gosh, especially when it's highly sensitive data, and you know that the rest of their practices are maybe, I'm sorry if this is your company, but come talk to me if this is your company. I'm happy to help out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's because the data folks are not always engineers, right? And so some of the things that we think about, like infrastructure as code, like hygiene, all of these things that really we've hashed out over the years and perfected, don't always directly translate into the data world one-to-one. And I think the data world is starting to catch up to some of these practices. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think we're seeing
Yeah.
that in other fields too. That we're sort of we're enforcing our will upon,
Yeah.
upon other folks.
That's one way to say it, yeah.
Best practices would be
Yeah.
the other term, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of one of the great things about a catalog, is that you can manage all of those really messy pieces that you want the engineers to handle, and then create like a single API for everybody to just pull off of. So you don't have everybody with their hands in the mix, touching things and messing it up, and then like aborting it somewhere else in the company. And so I think it helps bring some order and separates out who should be handling what, which is really important.
Awesome. All right, Lisa. Well, where can our viewers go to learn more about any of this? Data architecture, data catalogs, your company? Where do you want to send them?
I would say Google Apache Gravitino, go to our repo. I feel like the repo is always the source of truth. People can say what things do and what they don't, but just try it out. We have a playground, so people can just download everything on Docker containers that contain everything that you need to get started and do a quick start and play around.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show today and in the first guest. So we will be here all week interviewing other folks, and you're at the top of the slot. So thanks for being here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. See you next time.
Bye.